clarifying questions, etc. And we're recording in progress. So are you okay to begin then just by outlining what took place from your perspective?
Yes, certainly. Thank you,
Thanks,
Anthony. Right. Last year, this all took place in 2022. In April, it started, in fact. I was running for mayor of my local borough, Lewisham, South East London. And like anybody else, any other candidate, I put out a manifesto. I had 6 points in my manifesto, which went in a mayoral booklet, which was distributed to all of the registered voters in Lewisham, about 200,000 of them, in fact. And this is one of the benefits of running in races such as mayoral elections, because you get your information about yourself and your party out there to all of the registered voters, rather than just someone in your constituency. It's everybody in the borough. So these are the advantages of running in elections such as mayoral elections. Anyway, I had 6 points in my manifesto, all of which are very relevant. But point number 3 stated, marriage was my headline. I pledge to cut through the political correctness and simply state the truth. The natural marriage between a man and a woman is the fundamental building block for a successful society and the safest environment for raising children. Well, I did not think this statement was that radical, personally. I thought I just stated a well-known fact and common sense. However, needless to say, some people were upset. Well, understandably, not everyone agrees with that statement. And my former employer received 3 complaints about my statement. However, there were also complaints submitted to the local borough, Lewisham Borough. The borough said to these people, she's allowed to say whatever she wants, as long as it's not breaking the law, basically. And the local borough pretty much pushed them aside. My former employer, however, took these complaints on. And these complaints were, I've got something here, I don't think I actually sent them to you, but I do have them here somewhere. The complaints were basically accusing me of being homophobic and dangerous views about the LGBTQ community. I should not be allowed to operate as an employee of my former company, and I should be brought through a disciplinary process and basically punished for my views. I'm just summarising the extent of those complaints. There were 3 of them. 2 came from a particular building that I know very well. I used to manage and they recognised me. 1 came from an actual colleague, I don't know who that was, who works for the company. However, on the 20th of April, I got a call from my HR department saying that they'd received complaints about something posted on Twitter. Now, just to be clear, I did not actually post my manifesto on Twitter. It was posted there by an aggrieved complainant who tagged in the CPA's Twitter account, not my own personal Twitter account, the CPA's Twitter account.
And that's the Christian People's Alliance, for anybody who's listening.
Christian People's Alliance, indeed. Thank you, Tony. The Christian People's Alliance, they tagged that particular Twitter account in. And it just happened to be connected to the person that posted it, happened to be connected to somebody that is a resident of the company that I used to work for, who recognized me. So my company called me on the 20th of April, told me about these complaints, and said it was a problem. So the next day they had what we called a pre-investigation meeting, basically questioning me about what was put on the in the manifesto, and I just reiterated it's my right to actually say these things because, you know, it's my belief, and as far as I'm concerned, the last time I looked, we lived in a free country. We are, you know, the free West, and I'm allowed to say what I like to say on whatever platform I like to say, so long as I'm not breaking the law or causing direct harm or it being hate speech. Well, they actually accused me of actually hate speech. This is essentially what they're accusing me of. So after that, they launched an investigation. This took 2 weeks. They suspended me with pay for 2 weeks until this investigation was completed. They completed the investigation. I had a disciplinary hearing on the 6th of May, 2022. Basically, they didn't really investigate. All they did was really try to find something else to add to their original charges to make sure that their case was ironclad. So, as well as being charged with discrimination, and breaking their social media policies, is quite ridiculous, really. They also charged me with not disclosing my political activities to them, non-disclosure they called it, which was just added on so that they could, make sure they had an ironclad case. Now, during all of my various meetings with them, I highlighted to them my rights, my Article 9 and Article 10 of the human rights laws, highlighted my protections under the Equality Act regarding my religion. All of that they seemed to dismiss. In fact, what they were really saying to me was, yes, we appreciate the fact that you do have protection under the Equality Act, but what we object to is you expressing your religion publicly, which is a completely ridiculous statement. I highlighted, well, if I can't express them publicly, what do we live in? A totalitarian society? Is this not a free society? How is it I cannot express myself publicly? So to this day, kept really stressing the point of it being potentially upsetting to other people. Well, of course, you can be upset by just about anything. And I did point out, if I said I was not a dog lover, I hated dogs at a dog lovers meeting, they'd be upset. That does not mean it's discrimination. So they seem to conflate the two. You are upsetting people, therefore you're discriminating. And I was quite adamant that's not the case. So I appealed, of course, and my appeal, you have to submit the appeal within 7 days of the decision. After the investigation, disciplinary hearing, on the 9th of May, they actually dismissed me and fired me for all the charges they leveled against me. So I appealed. The appeal had to be submitted within 7 days of the dismissal. I did so, and I had an appeal hearing on I think it was the 27th of May, which was actually overseen by quite a high-ranking director in the company. And again, they were really just going on with the same points. And I stressed the point that, I'm having no protections under the Equality Act here. You're completely dismissing my protections under the characteristic of religion on the Equality Act. But again, they were just harping on about, my discrimination, my potentially upsetting people. Anyway, so of course the appeal was not, received. They upheld their decision, and the dismissal was made final. That is the 27th of May, 2022. And of course, during all of this, I was liaising with the Christian Legal Centre in regards to getting advice about my case and bringing forward a case against my former employer, L&Q, as a result of the process they've just put me through, and blatant discrimination against me for my Christian values. Clearly, it was about my Christian values and about me just expressing those values publicly. So that is essentially what happened to me in a nutshell.
And then let's just confirm from in your words how the process concluded.
Well, the process concluded with I did actually sue L&Q. I brought a case. I applied for a case to go to the Employment Tribunal with the assistance of the Christian Legal Centre. And so it went for quite a few months. We didn't have a hearing date yet. The hearing was scheduled for, I believe, January this year. But I think it was April this year. But within that time, L&Q obviously came to the conclusion that I did have quite a strong case. And they did put out initially a settlement offer, which I did discuss with my legal team. And after some negotiations and obviously prayer, because being a Christian, prays about everything, I decided to accept their offer to settle outside of court. So that's how we concluded.
That was the end of the process. Yeah. And you were suing them for discrimination as opposed to pursuing an employment tribunal?
Yes, discriminating against me.
Right.
For my Christian value, basically. Great.
Well, that's clarified that. Maureen, thank you very much for that. Just to clarify for the recording, I think the recording started a little bit late. The point of these processes is that we're giving you an opportunity, an objective opportunity, to put on the public record what you feel happened to you, and that the other people around the table who I introduced are here to then ask questions, and not in any kind of judgmental way at all, but simply to clarify. Thank you for all the documentation you've sent us, which is extensive and much detail in there. But we'll just go through a process, if it's okay with you, of people around the table asking questions just for clarification purposes, finding out any information that you want to give. And of course, it's perfectly within your right to give more information or not to give more information as you so feel fit to place or not place on the public record, Maureen. So thank you very much for that. Let's start with Linda, shall we? Any follow-ups or any questions from you, Linda?
Yes, just a few questions to occur. Maureen, thank you very much for coming along today and giving your testimony. The two main allegations against you seem to be that discrimination and that you had breached the company's code of conduct in failing to declare political activity. Now, I believe you said that you weren't aware of that requirement at the time, but I'm sure you've checked through your contract since then. Is it actually formally written into your contract that you will declare any political activity? Does it say what it defines as political activity? And I have another question on the back of that. Are you aware of anybody else within the wider company at any time who has been involved in what the company would define as political activity?
Yeah, I'm not sure. The second question, I'm not sure if anyone else is involved in political activity. I don't know. In terms of the first question, it doesn't necessarily say in my contract per se, but it does say in the code of conduct that you are supposed to disclose any activity that might cause a conflict of interest. This is how they kind of word it, a conflict of interest. So if your political activity is going to cause a conflict of interest, that's when you have to declare it. But we did have this discussion during the hearings, and they were trying to make the point that one of my points of my manifesto was that I would reform the housing policy of the local council. And they were trying to make the point that would be a conflict of interest. But then I said, well, if I was elected mayor, clearly I would resign from this company. So there would be no conflict of interest at all. So how is that a conflict of interest? They said, well, maybe a conflict of interest. They were really stretching the point, really stretching it. And quite frankly, it was just added on to try and bolster their case, to try and make sure they could get me on something else to ensure that they could justify dismissing me. And not only that, but I have been involved in political activity since 2015. So it's not just like last year I started. And I have been engaged with all of my line managers knew about my political activities. Not one of them ever said to me, you're supposed to declare this officially so that you can continue in these activities. They all knew about it, all of them. I've had about 3 line managers, and maybe even 4.
Right.
I've been involved in the activity. Not one of them ever said. And in fact, my assistant director, about 2019, she actually signed one of my nomination forms, and she never actually said, you should be declaring this officially to the company in order to carry out these activities. Not one of them said it. So this is a failure of management. If not one of them actually said to me, you need to declare this. That's a failure.
Maureen, just coming back there to the conflict of interest, and them saying that because you had reform of the housing policy in your manifesto, did you ever suggest to them that actually your reform of housing policy might be extremely supportive of the work of the company? Was that ever taken into consideration?
No, I didn't suggest it, but I mean, they were not thinking along those lines. Like the good point, Linda, should have brought that up at the time. But no, they did not even consider that, there might not be a conflict, it could be a complementary, policy I put in place, saying that I've learned all my good policies from L&Q. Good point. But it was never considered. They were just looking at the negative aspects of it and the potential conflict of interest, which is complete, absolute nonsense. Because as I said, if I was elected mayor, I would no longer be working for L&Q. So there'd be no conflict of interest at all. So it was a non-point, really.
Fair point. I do have some other questions, Tony, but I think maybe allow other people to
yeah, by all means. Okay, let's go to Paul. Any follow-ups or any clarifications, Paul?
Okay, I hope I'm not going to cross, but and just finishing off on the politics point, the code of conduct, it was actually had quite a precise point, didn't it? It's A8. It did say you will not engage in any political or campaigning activity that might compromise the position. So, I mean, in effect, your employer was seeking to have a veto on all your private political activities.
Indeed, yes.
And they could tell you, well, you can be a Labour Party member, but you can't be a Conservative Party member, in effect.
Essentially, yes, that's what they were trying to say. And I made the point. So what if I was going to talk about fly tipping? Would that also be off the table? It said yes. So that means I said I can't talk about anything then.
Yeah. So in other words, in a private employment contract, they were saying we're removing your rights of politics and free speech.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
And if you don't like it, we're going to sack you.
Basically.
Yeah.
Basically.
And they've got total control, haven't they? Because they can just twist it, can't they? They say, well, this embarrasses us, so you've got no rights. And this we don't think embarrasses us, so we're going to even back you, facilitate it, and help you.
Exactly. It's completely biased. There's nothing objective about it. It's completely subjective. If they like what you're saying, it's fine. If they don't like what you're saying, then that's it.
Yeah. And so yeah, and then they've sort of got an additional twist on it, haven't they? They're sort of saying, well, it's not because you're a Christian. You can have whatever views you want in your head, provided they stay in your head. But if you actually manifest, express free speech, then we can punish you. So, I mean, I suppose in the Soviet Union, it was pretty similar. You could think Brezhnev was an idiot.
Exactly.
Provided you didn't actually say to anybody that you thought he was an idiot.
Exactly. Well, I did, highlight this point. The idea of the Equality Act is that you can express those characteristics without discrimination, without being punished for them. That's the whole idea of the Equality Act, if I'm not mistaken.
And I'm probably going to just want to clarify one other thing. You said you accepted the settlement, right?
Yes.
And what is something is potential. I'm now digressing. There wasn't any confidentiality agreement in that settlement, was there? Or
we did have an NDA, non-disclosure agreement. However, the only aspect of it I was not able to disclose was the amount that I settled.
Okay.
Everything else I can talk about. I wouldn't have accepted it otherwise.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And this is something that's sort of I'm sort of trying to address. You work for LNG. You have a good reputation. You know, you've been there probably many years, etc., etc. And you say the wrong thing, and you've lost your job.
Absolutely.
And I'm sort of wondering about your colleagues. So they're at the work and they're sort of sitting there and they go, Maureen's a great bloke. Forgive me for the sort of cross sexes, but Maureen's a great bloke. She's fantastic. And she, did you see what happened to her? And there's a sort of, these big companies just plow on. I mean, they got rid of you in effect, haven't they? Okay, there's a payment, but they got rid of you.
Yeah.
And would you imagine your colleagues are intimidated or empowered by what happened to you?
Completely intimidating. In fact, since then I've spoken to a couple of them, and they were shocked about what happened to me, and they empathized with me. But again, this did not empower them to express their views if they disagreed with the, inequality and diversity programs of L&Q. So it's a very chilling effect on particularly other people who may be Christians in the company if they decide that they would like to do off-work activities. Let me just stress, all of this is done outside of work hours, on my own time. I was not in the employment of L&Q, at my 9 to 5 hours. I was doing my own thing off company time.
Yeah.
So anyone else in the company that maybe wanted to do something of this nature, to serve the community, do something of this kind, it sends a very chilling effect. You'll probably lose your job if you do not agree completely with what L&Q has in their D&I programs.
Yeah, I just want to get that because you said it very clearly. So it's absolutely clear if you work for LNG, you better
L&Q.
agree in every way what they believe in politically, or they'll sack you.
Basically, yes. If you don't line with it, and it's the inclusion programs. It's this D&I program that they have. This is their crowning joy. It's their jewel in the crown, if you like. They're very proud of it. So if you go against this particular thing, I think you get punished more than anything else.
Yeah. Okay. And let's take that take it just a bit further. Let's say someone wanted a promotion or important job. You know what it's like. They Google him. The person goes to an evangelical church, and the church says marriage is between a man and a woman, and we will uphold to biblical principle. Let's just say that. So as far as they're concerned, there's a religious bar to office, if I could put it in that language. You can't work for them, and they can search. You'll be a bigot, wouldn't you?
Well, actually, one of the complaints calls me a bigot.
Yeah.
And I did take them to task on that. They said they were not taking that on board. However, they must have been taking it on board because they did progress me to a disciplinary process based on these complaints. However, you're quite right, Paul. It's a very chilling thought that they can do a social media search on you, find out what your views are, particularly in terms of your religious stance or your conservative values or Christian values, and that could bar you from any sort of progress in the company.
Yeah.
They'll never tell you this, of course, but it's quite possible that could happen.
No, and there's a bit of a snitch culture as well, isn't there? Somebody's who you've worked for, the house, they see you doing something they don't like, and they actually snitch you, and they actually say, spar this woman, punish this woman, we demand it.
Yeah, well, that happened to me.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's why I'm saying it.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what happens.
It's kind of a bit like the Stasi in East Germany, isn't it?
Exactly. No, you're quite right. And what are we turning into as a nation?
Yeah.
Is this what we're turning into? Is it the days of Stalin and
Yeah, well, so, I mean, not quite at Stalin, but you got in your P45, aren't you? Pretty
Yeah, but
easy.
it's heading in that direction.
Yeah, well, it is. It's the same
Yeah.
thinking. You people are troublesome, and we need to make sure that you conform. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much for
Thank
that.
you.
Great. Thank
Yeah.
you, Paul. Will, any questions or follow-ups?
Yeah, I was just going to ask the in your discussions with the with your employer, was any weight placed on the fact that courts have found that a belief in traditional marriage, man-woman marriage, is itself a protected belief, a philosophical belief? Was anything placed on that, or was it all about was it all focused on religious belief and religious discrimination specifically?
Well, they had a general sort of attitude that regardless of what belief I expressed, religious belief, I expressed it publicly. That was their problem. I expressed it publicly because there were a couple of other things that they picked off my Twitter account. One was I was speaking about transgender men competing against biological women in sports, saying that obviously this is not quite correct, it's not fair. They picked that up as being discriminatory. I don't know how. And another tweet that I didn't actually post, I just liked it, was about the Pope allowing the pride flag to be displayed at the Vatican, which of course is antithetical to Christian beliefs. Catholics are supposed to believe in the Bible, and that's not what the Bible teaches. So the tweet was really about the Vatican and not necessarily about the community itself, but they picked that up as being discriminatory. So it was more about me expressing those beliefs publicly rather than the fact that it was necessarily about traditional marriage. Because I could have said something else too, like, in regards to the LGBT community. It was the fact that I expressed that publicly. That was their problem. They didn't have a problem with the view. That's what they said. Oh, you're allowed to have your views, but we object to you expressing it publicly.
Well, thank you. Was any weight at all placed by them, do you think, on, did they give any indication that that something being a protected belief under the Equality Act made any difference to their consideration in that regard, in terms of manifesting it?
No, because I did actually ask them before I had the disciplinary meeting. I sent them this email. I wanted assurance that the biblical view regarding marriage between a man and woman are protected under the Equality Act. It must be stated before the interview that they accept that only attacks on people are a disciplinary. Sorry. So basically, I was asking them to acknowledge that my view about traditional marriage is protected under the Equality Act. But they never did do that. They just sort of brushed it away and did not actually acknowledge that that view that I have is actually a Christian view and is protected under the Equality Act. They did not actually do that. They did not acknowledge that. I requested it, but they just didn't acknowledge it.
Thank you. And why do you think they settled? I mean, I'm sorry if that's asking you to speculate, so don't if you don't want to. But do you think it's because they realised that if it went to a court they would lose, or do you think it was for other reasons?
I think it's a couple of things. Number one, they were looking at the legal costs, because we know these cases can go on for quite some time. So for them, obviously they were paying for their legal counsel. It could be going, if I had not settled, it will still be litigation now. This could have gone on for another 2-3 years. If I'd lost at the employment tribunal, we'd have to go to another court, etc., etc., etc. But so for them, they're looking down the road and thinking this could cost us quite a bit of money. So they're probably making more of a financial decision. And the fact that I did have a very strong case. And I did cite
Right.
some other cases to them. Keith Waters, he's one of the people the Christian Legal Centre helped. His case is very similar to mine. He did actually win his case. So I did actually cite case law to them during my various hearings with them, but it didn't seem to make much difference. However, I think they settled financially was the main reason why they settled out of court, actually.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Will. Just to follow up, Maureen, on Will's point there, did they offer you any apology, or was it purely a non-committed financial settlement in order to
Well,
close?
it was not an official apology, but part of the compensation was harm. Part of the amount was harm done to me. Didn't actually issue an apology in black and white per se.
But they accepted harm had been done and compensated for it. Yeah.
They acknowledged there was harm done to me. Part of the
Okay. And then can I ask, from my perspective, then, just for you to clarify something for me, thank you for the detailed documents you sent through to us, but they only started at the disciplinary hearing, if you like, in the notes of that. And you alluded in your introduction that you thought their problem was you expressing your views around marriage, not just holding them in your head, as Paul said, but actually expressing them, and that was their complaint. But then you seem to imply that the investigation was purely around scrabbling around for other stuff to add to that because that wasn't presumably good enough. Have you got any evidence for that actually they were seeking other stuff? First of all, that was the original complaint. So it wasn't that you'd been partaking in political activity. It was that you'd said something about marriage which they deemed was offensive. And then they were struggling to find other stuff to add to that. Do you have any evidence, or is that just your view?
Essentially, it's just my view, but I do know they did not interview anybody else.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what investigation they did, but they didn't interview other people. I don't know what they were investigating, quite frankly.
Yeah, but the original. So when you were first contacted about a complaint, it wasn't, oh, you've said these things, and by the way, you're engaging in political activity when you shouldn't do. It was that, oh, you've said these things and they're offensive, and then it was later on that and by the way, we've also noted that you're okay.
After the so-called 2-week investigation, the only thing they seemed to add to that was that breach of the disclosure.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that did, from a timeline perspective, it definitely did come in later on in the conversation. Okay. Yeah. That's fair enough. And then I'm just curious. So from your perspective, and let's paint the picture of a good organization, how they would have responded to having received a complaint from their customers, as it were, about the behavior of one of their employers. Paint a picture of how they should have dealt with that properly in your mind, and what it would have looked like as an excellent organizational response.
An excellent organization would have said the following. They would have said, we don't necessarily agree with Miss Martin's views, but we are committed to inclusion. So in that respect, we accept what she said. We don't agree with it, but we are committed to being inclusive. That's what they should have said.
Yeah.
And dismiss. That should have been the end of it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just around the panel again, does anybody else have any follow-ups on any of those points that we've had?
Well, I'd like actually some follow-up, but on slightly different issues here, because I'd quite like to explore this whole idea of values, because I noticed that it was said at some point that residents had raised concerns about that your views contradict L&Q values, and raised concern about your ability to carry out the work without discrimination. I am curious to know what precisely L&Q's values were and are, and where this was set down. And I have to say that I did have a quick look at the company profile, last night, and I noticed that they've had a very strong relationship with Stonewall from 2011, and we're actually a Stonewall diversity champion in 2012. Now, was this set down anywhere that this was their values?
Yes.
Where does this come from?
It comes from their, if you go on their website, and even if as an employee, their values are in their various documents, and we are trained on them regularly, their values. It's mostly the inclusion values they're talking about, their diversity and inclusion. That's what they pride themselves on more than anything else. Is this kind of the D&I program. However, as you pointed out, that their values are very unequal, a bit like the Equality Act in that respect, because some values are more inclusive than others, it appears. So even though they say they're inclusive, what they're saying is that we are only inclusive to a certain point. So this is why I think they would have been better off having said, we don't agree with Miss Martin's views, but we do value, we are committed to inclusion, because that would have proved that they really are inclusive, rather than being exclusive of views that they don't like. So what they've demonstrated is not inclusion, it's exclusion, in fact. So they've actually done themselves harm by taking this stance.
They weren't amenable to this point being put to them, clearly, from what you're saying.
No, they weren't. No, I did actually put this point to them, and they just kind of dismissed it. In fact, I actually did a reverse question on them. I asked them, what if it was reversed? What if someone had written a policy point that was in favor of the LGBTQ community, and a Christian has complained to you about it, a Christian resident, would you have taken the same actions? And I got a non-answer. They just didn't respond. So I suspect there would not have been the same response.
Sorry, Maureen.
No, go ahead. And as you said, they are very strongly linked to Stonewall. In fact, I think they got an award from Stonewall last year for them championing Stonewall's values and, you know, promoting the LGBTQ community, and they're what they stand for. So you're quite right in highlighting that. In fact, I even said that to them in one of my meetings. I think it was the appeal meeting. I did highlight that they're strongly tied to Stonewall. I suspect this is the reason for this process I was going through.
And how far do you think this covert, and I call it covert because it does seem to be something that they wouldn't acknowledge as a policy view, but how far did it extend? Because it's a housing association, isn't it, L&Q? Would they have offered housing to people who, again, were not entirely happy with an LGBTQ viewpoint, do you think?
I don't think so, because during the selection process for housing, I don't think they ask those sort of questions. The way they actually select people for housing and for accommodation is they work with local councils, and the local councils nominate people. And the nomination process is done by lettings officers who are not necessarily, you know, the high echelons of the L&Q corporate body. They're obviously employees like me, and they just go through a process of nomination process and ask very standard basic questions. They don't really ask questions in regards to the political leanings or their views on traditional or non-traditional values. They don't necessarily ask questions of that kind, so I don't think so, to be fair.
So as far as you're aware, it's simply a policy that extends to employees and potential
Yes.
employees. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Linda. Any other follow-up questions for Maureen?
I think I might just follow that up, just what Linda's quite interestingly pursued. Just to sort of clarify a few points which you said. So you've got this diversity policy, and it looks wonderful, but you're saying it's actually a political tool. There are certain values they like more than others, and so it looks very good and equal, but it's not. Would that be an accurate summary?
Yeah, absolutely. Because they completely ignore certain qualities on the Equality Act. Some are more equal than others, it seems.
Yeah.
So the religion characteristic is being is subservient to, you know, sexuality or sexual orientation. Quite
Yeah.
clearly, in this case, it was demonstrated to be so.
Yeah, and just a second question Linda asked, just pursuing that. You said, well, we're not there yet. We don't know what people's religious or political views are when we offer them accommodation. But, you know the way we're heading as a society. LNG sort of say, we must have the most noble people. Why should we give accommodation to right-wing bigots? We're going to make sure they're good people for neighbors. That's possible, isn't it? And then your views will stop you.
It's a possibility, Paul, absolutely. I mean, I can't say that won't definitely happen,
Yeah.
but the way things are going,
They could have that power. There's nothing stopping them. Yeah.
absolutely. And this is why it's so important that, you know, Christians, when they find themselves in these situations, that we do push back. Because if I hadn't, with the help of CLC, Christian Legal Centre, if I hadn't pursued a case against them, nothing would have happened at all. There'll be no offer on the table. In fact, I didn't even say this part of my testimony, what I should have. I went to the press, July the 17th, 2022. I had quite a large spread in the Mail on Sunday, which went global. I got quite a few interviews internationally and nationally as a result of that story. So not only did they do themselves harm in respect of, you know, not being committed to their so-called inclusion program, they suffered reputational damage on an international level because I went to the press.
Yeah.
So they did themselves more harm than they did me in the end.
Now, how do you feel now that you've lost your job? Did you like it, love it, or?
Yeah, quite frankly, I feel liberated from L&Q. I mean, for a Christian, it's quite a repressive environment.
Yeah.
If you cannot feel free to express your faith and your religion, that's a repressive environment, oppressive and repressive.
Yeah.
So quite frankly, I feel liberated from them. And I'm free to, you know, sound the clarion call to other Christians who find themselves in these situations. Then they must push back and they must kind of seek legal assistance. Thankfully, we've got the CLC there to help us. And make these companies know that we're not going to ride off into the sunset and disappear.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to have to be called to account for your behaviour.
Yeah.
So.
Great. Just picking up on that point, it's interesting. I haven't looked at the claims, Miriam, around their involvement with Stonewall and diversity champions and Stonewall champions prizes for this, that, and the other. But surely that would be a public expression of their views on those issues. And so they're doing the very thing that they dismissed you for doing, which is expressing publicly their beliefs on certain protected characteristics under the Equality Act.
Of course they are. But see, as far as they're concerned, their beliefs are the popular ones. You know, it's the ones that get them the golden handshake with with Stonewall and gets them up on the corporate list of the woke companies, and it's all posturing and it's all just kind of very vain. It has nothing to do with reality and nothing to do with what real people think about, because quite frankly, the community they're appealing to is such a small minority of people. The majority of people just think normal thoughts. You know, marriage between one man and one woman, And the kids need to grow up in a home with the father and mother. Most people think this. The majority of people think it's the minority of people they're appealing to.
And I suppose I'm not sure if you can answer this, but you've spoken about the chilling effect on other people. You've also encouraged other people to speak up, but it's actually very, very difficult when you know that on the one hand, you could lose your job and you could lose your income and you could lose your home and your family could be in destitution because of you sticking up for what the law says you're allowed to say and believe. So I don't know what advice you would give for people in a similar situation. I'm guessing you would do the same thing as you did because you said you had no regrets. But what advice maybe do we give to other people in a similar situation who think, yeah, but it's all well and good to say speak up, but actually I'm not sure I can suffer the consequences.
Indeed, it is difficult, Tony. But I suggest that people do ask themselves that question. You have to count the cost. You know, you're a Christian.
Yeah, I mean that's a good question Tony had asked. You know, what if you'd had no publicity? What if you'd had no settlement? What if you know, I don't know what your personal circumstances are, but it could be a terrible blow to your life.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I can kind of say to people that they can maybe internally in the company, maybe get on certain groups and try to kind of, if you like, infiltrate the groups, if you like, and try to kind of steer the group in certain directions. Like I was actually on one of the diversity groups within the company, and I was kind of, you know, trying to kind of steer them a certain way and try to inject other opinions into the group rather than on the group think, you know, trying to kind of inject some maybe, you know, Judeo-Christian values in there. It's very difficult, but you do have to ask yourself, you know, is it worth it? I do understand.
Yeah, and I think why I was asking my question, your colleagues being intimidated and they see you know, Maureen's a great person. There'd be lots of other cases, you know, someone else has been dismissed who didn't get the publicity, who'd worked for their company for 20 years, always turned up on time to open whatever it was, and because they were a Christian, they were thrown out. There is this sort of, you know, this sort of real intimidation in the country, isn't there, almost?
Yeah, it is. Unfortunately, it's a problem. There's no simple answer
No.
to that question. And this is why people like me and what you're doing here is so important, to highlight the fact this is going on.
Yeah.
And we need to do something about it. And to provide those people who are maybe in the situation right now with some hope that there are people out there who are trying to do something about it. Not everyone's called to, you know, be the one who, you know, carries the flag and, you know, gets into the ring. You have the boxers in the ring and you have all the people around who are the audience, you know, on each side. It's those people in the ring that are doing the fighting. Not everyone's called to get in the ring. I'm one of those people in the ring. You are some of those people in the ring. But we're fighting for the other people who are the spectators. This is what I see. And I do appreciate people's situations. And not everyone could do what I'm doing. But maybe we're not all called to do what I'm doing or what you're doing. Maybe we're just the Gideon 300 who are there to make the way for everybody else to have the confidence to come to the battle. So,
just picking up on that then, picking up on this whole idea of intimidation, I find, and obviously you're campaigning to become Mayor of Lewisham, so there wouldn't have been a time prior to this to level this sort of attack at you. But the fact that it was raised while you were campaigning, it would feel like there was a definite political agenda behind this by whoever raised the complaint in the first place, and that it was being used as a tool. And I'm just wondering, what effect did this actually have on your campaign at the time? Did it damage you, or did it raise the profile a bit?
Well, they did actually try to suggest that I should withdraw from the campaign. I said, absolutely not. No way. So it didn't actually affect the campaign per se. It did actually raise my profile somewhat, actually. I did get quite a few bit of correspondence, in fact, from people. Some negative, some positive. That's okay. That's what free speech is about, right? You put it out there, you want to disagree with me, you can disagree. Fair enough, we can discuss it. But it did actually raise the profile. But I did not withdraw from the campaign in any way, shape, or form. They suggested I should, and I said no, absolutely not. But you raise a good point there, Linda. There was a sort of like a political angle to it. And it may have been somebody who was, you know, not really in favour of me running that actually put on the complaints in. But I don't know that for sure, but it's certainly something to think about.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Any final follow-ups from people around the table before I ask Maureen if she wants to conclude with any remarks? Any follow-ups, first of all? No.
You raised the issue of there being a how best to put it, an inequality, a difference in the way, and a selectivity, that's the word I'm looking for, in the way that companies respond to complaints from certain sections of the community, thinking of particularly here of LGBT or those connected with that community, and possibly complaints from other sections such as Christians or people who object to things around pride and things like that. Did you want to? I was wondering if you want to say anything more about that. In particular, do you think that they? I think you said that they weren't willing to answer your question on that. So, but do you think that they had received complaints? Have you had any indication from people in the area that they'd complained to the company about their policies on that? And do you think that maybe that there's a problem in that maybe Christians are less likely to complain? Is that part of the problem? Just I wondered if you wanted to say anything about that.
Yeah, it's a good point, Will. I think you're right in the sense that maybe Christians are less likely to complain if they did actually see something they didn't like in terms of, you know, support for the LGBT community, because we're more tolerant. That's the whole idea, right? We love people. We don't love the same, but we love people, and so we are more tolerant, so less likely to complain. I don't know of anyone else who has complained, and you know, in terms of a Christian complaining, and L&Q have dismissed it or maybe provided the answer they should have provided for, in my case. But I don't know of anyone who has. But I suspect that if they had, they would have provided that answer. Yes, we don't agree with her, but we are committed to inclusion. But I think it's because they're so in bed with Stonewall and so committed to, you know, pleasing this community and pleasing this wokeness, if I can put it that way, that anything that is contrary to that agenda that's been expressed by one of their employees publicly, particularly when running for office, has to be punished, and particularly if residents have complained about it. Now, when you consider that 200,000 people received my election material, and only, I think, one person in the borough complained, because the other two complaints were out of borough. They were not even in borough. So I think one person, I think it was the colleague being the L&Q employee, one person in the borough complained. Now we put that in perspective, one person out of 200,000. That is it's minuscule, it's practically nothing, right?
So,
let's be
yeah.
honest. So they
Yeah,
go ahead, Will. My apologies, go ahead.
So there's the first point that the idea that there's any kind of reputational damage is tenuous, is highly tenuous at best, with only one complaint. And then there's a second point about potential selectivity, or it seems quite blatant selectivity, but But there's it would be interesting to know in terms of persecution of Christians in particular. It feels like it would be helpful to be able to make more of that apparent selectivity that that organisations have when they, such as companies such as the one you work for, had, that they take action, they take quite extreme action when certain complaints, maybe only a single complaint, is received on an issue that they agree with. But if a complaint is received on something that they disagree with, then they you understand what I mean. If they're not in line, if they don't agree with the complaint, I mean, then they will be much more dismissive. I think that would seem to be pretty clear evidence of discrimination against Christians and persecution against Christians in particular. So some more examples of that, I think, would be good.
Yeah, indeed. Yes, I totally agree with you. Yes, this selectivity has to be sort of addressed and brought out, and hopefully this commission will expose this, not only in the company I work for, but generally speaking, in terms of persecuting the Christians generally in this country in particular, because I don't think most people realise it's going on, and it's quite subtle and quite under the radar, but it needs to be exposed and it needs to be addressed.
I think that's a great point to begin to conclude on. I think, Maureen, that a lot of for every Maureen that stands up and fights the system, there are 100 people or 1,000 people who have said something who lose their fight and nobody knows about them. And behind them, there's 10,000 people who daren't say anything in the first place because they see what happens to those who do. And so I think that's why it's so important to highlight these things, so people can realize. I hope we've done it in an objective as way as possible, bearing in mind we're only speaking to you, we're not speaking to the other side. Do you feel, Maureen, you've had ample opportunity to elaborate upon your situation in your case? Is there anything else you'd like to tell us?
No, I think it's been a very thorough interview, and I think I've expressed pretty much everything that happened to me, not in minute detail, of course, but this very general overview, and all the main points have been covered. And I do really want to stress the importance of this commission inquiry, because, as I said before, and as we've discussed, it's not easy for people to make these decisions to stand up and fight, because they think about their livelihoods, their reputations, because after you've been fired for gross misconduct, it can be a challenge to get employment again in the same field, which is something I sort of have experienced. So I do appreciate people's situations, but as I said before, we are in the ring and we're fighting for the people that are the audience.
And maybe even if you can't, if you're listening and you think, I can't say anything, I can't say what I believe, perhaps the best you can do is not say what you don't believe. Live not by lies, as they say. Perhaps you can't stick up for what's in your head because you're too scared, but don't say what is patently wrong in accordance with your beliefs. Absolutely. Good. Listen, the next step, as far as I understand, is when and if we publish this, we'll let you know, and so you know where to go and